Hi. I am so excited. I'm going to invite Dr. Alfie. Invite. Okie doke. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you all. I'm kind of sad. Hello. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. It's good to meet you.
You too with that beautiful smile. This is gonna make
Oh,
it go even better. Look at you.
oh my gosh, I'm so excited to do this. I'm just pulling up some notes for myself, but
Of course. Of
how
course.
are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good. Yeah, it's kind of cold here. I'm used to. Where are you in the world?
I'm in the DMV, Northern Virginia.
Really? What part?
Yeah. See,
What?
so what part?
Hmm.
Downtown
In,
Arlington.
wow.
Arlington.
Okay. I grew up in Northern Virginia. That's why I asked. Very
Oh,
excited.
what part did you grow up in?
In Leesburg?
Oh, yeah, you're a little further down.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But I
Yeah,
went
I know Leesburg.
to,
Really?
yeah.
Leesburg, is it diverse? It's not very diverse, right? I didn't think so. Yeah. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, so I'm from Virginia.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, people are coming in fast, but
They sure are.
I'm excited. Thanks everyone for joining in. My name is Mimi. I'm a clinical mental health counseling intern. I'm currently in Provo, Utah. I'm finishing my master's degree in clinical rehabilitation and mental health counseling. So lots of big clinical words, but basically I do therapy and I'm really passionate about eating disorders and OCD. So I'm excited to be here with Dr. Alfie.
I'm so happy that you all invited me. It is when we get off, I'll figure out how y'all found me, but I love it. I'm just really happy to be here.
Yes. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. So my name's Alfie Braylon Noble. Everyone calls me Dr. Alfie. I am a psychologist by training. I have about 25 years of experience in the field of mental health. And my work is all centered on bringing people out of the margins and into the center in these discussions of mental health. Because you know from your training, Mimi, and I'll say as a side note, I will always remember Mimi because my best friend from childhood, she's Pinay, Filipina. Her nickname was Mimi. So
Oh,
that was like, we were cheerleaders together, all that good stuff. And so Mimi is like very dear to my heart. And my daughter calls her godmother Mimi. That's one of my best girlfriends from undergrad. So we have a lot of Mimis in our life, and you're another Mimi, so we love it. But really, my passion is making sure that everyone who deserves an opportunity for optimal mental health, that's what we call it at my foundation or my organization, I'm sorry, the Acoma Project, has an opportunity to achieve it, right? And our thing at the Acoma Project, we're really about three things: raising consciousness, empowering people, and changing the system of mental health. Because as I said, we want people to come out of those margins and into the center. And they're not in the margins by choice, right? We know stigma exists, but we also know, as we're going to talk about today, that our mental health field has not always done a good job of being welcoming of people, of all types of people, in particular, people of color and people with marginalized identities, be that LGBTQ folks or folks with disabilities who also, right, let's not forget, are of color. And I see we have someone from France. Bonjour, ça va? That's all the French I got. I got a little teeny bit, so I had to like give you my little teeny bit of French, a little bit of French. But that's me. That's what I do. I'm a researcher. I call myself a mental health correspondent. I do a lot of showing up in different forms of media. And this is my passion. This is what I was put on this earth for, and I love it.
I'm so happy to hear that. I think it's amazing the work they're doing, and this bringing into the center is so important. Um, so I'm wondering, why do you think it's so important to have open conversations around mental health?
Because there's so many people who are struggling.
Mhm.
People we don't. I literally just before we started finished responding to a reporter, actually two reporters, and that they asked the same question: why should we have these conversations? And what I say is because I'm gonna first give credit to the generation that really blew it up for all of us, which is millennials, right? That generation is the one that said we're not gonna hide in the shadows with mental health. We're gonna be front and center. And I'm a Gen Xer, so they've given people like me and older the permission to talk about our mental health within our families, within our communities, within our friend groups and our peer groups. And so for me, it's important to have these conversations because everybody is somewhere on that continuum, right? It's not a dichotomy. Either you're mentally unhealthy or you're mentally healthy. We're all somewhere, right? And it's not linear, sort of cyclical, right? We cycle through different things. And so my goal is always to help people have these conversations in a way that allows them to, what I say, feel seen, feel heard. And as I was taught by people in the disability community, to feel valued. So we don't stay in that loaded language of seeing and hearing, because not everybody can see and hear, but everybody can feel valued. We can all feel. And so that's the goal, is to have these conversations so people know that they're important and that they're felt. And you would think you wouldn't have to say these kinds of things. You shouldn't have to tell people that they're valued, but you just look around today and you see so many people who don't feel that anyone sees them, who don't feel that anyone cares about them. And so mental health is a part of that. That's a downstream effect, right? Of not having people in your corner, not having people appreciate your lived experience, not having people understand what your triggers are. And so for me, that's why it's important.
Yeah, I love that answer. And I love how you broke it down a little bit historically and the contributions of so many different people, because it hasn't always been this open. And I think especially in BIPOC communities, it's like there's that extra layer of stigma. And so I think it's so important to have these conversations with all different types of people and communities, and bring in different perspectives that help us to understand what we're going for. And so that's really awesome.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. As someone who has been actively working in the mental health space, what would you say are the biggest misconceptions about mental health in the BIPOC community?
I think that for many of our communities, there are a couple, and some of them are newer. I think there's this idea historically, let me say that. So when I started my career about 25 years ago, if you were to mention race, culture, ethnicity, people would say you're creating division. Like you couldn't even talk about it. And so I happen to come from a field, my degree is in something called counseling psychology. So when people hear psychologist and they hear PhD, everybody thinks clinical psych. There are multiple, right? There's developmental, there's educational, there's so many different, divisions of it. And my degree is counseling psych. And counseling psych is, I have to say, with all honesty, is the field. It kind of grew out of rehabilitation psych, right? So it's rehab counseling psych. So the rehab folks and the counseling psych folks are the ones who've been talking about diversity from the beginning, like all the way back. And so I was fortunate, right? Like my colleagues in social work, my colleagues in nursing, we're taught about systems and we're taught about racism. We were taught about discrimination, and we're taught about sexism and homophobia and transphobia. Those were all things that were a part of my training. And so once I got out of my training and went into traditional medicine, I was in 2 departments of psychiatry, Duke and then Georgetown, and now I'm independent. But I think it was this idea that if you just said, well, let's talk about Black kids' mental health. Well, how's Black children's mental health any different than anybody else? Well, first of all, right, they had to get it the net going. First of all, let's be clear, right, that everybody doesn't struggle with discrimination in the same way that Black children and children of color do. So let's start there. And then when you add those other identities, right, that's why people are marginalized, because they're not seen, they're pushed out. So for me, it's, some of these misconceptions are that mental health is not something that's important to these different communities. Of course it is, right? That's one. Another is that racism and discrimination don't impact mental health. Give me a break, right? Of course they do, right? And I think another misconception is that the primary reason, and this is always controversial with people, the primary reason that people of color don't access mental health care is because of money. I said primary. It's not it is. That was me. I have a did I lose you?
No, you're
Hold
back.
on. Okay. I have a timeout filter on the Instagram, and so it timed me out. So anyway, now I can't see myself, but we're fine. So some of those other misconceptions are that money is the primary. Money is one. It's not the only. It's high on the list, but stigma is a much higher one than those others. Yeah. So those are some of the misconceptions.
Yeah, that's really important, because it's a tricky line, acknowledging that money can be a barrier, but also not implying that everybody who is a person of color has money issues, or they can't afford anything ever and they're the poor.
Right.
Like
oh, that's it.
And then there's the stigma aspect. I think that it's crazy to to even say that like race wouldn't play a role in mental health. Like everything plays a role in mental health. Our identities and the way that we are thought of historically. You cannot treat people the same exact way just because you want to ignore different factors. Um, and I think that's such an interesting comment too, of like people saying that divides people. And I think we're coming
Yeah,
back to that a little bit in school systems and stuff, which is kind of sad. I was hoping we were kind of moving away from that, but it's a cycle, like it's not that linear progress at all.
that's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Why are marginalized communities uniquely affected by these misconceptions? We kind of touched on that a little bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, what was your experience, for example, with getting into this field?
I think really it's similar to other ways in which marginalized people, marginalized communities, I guess it's one of the primary definitions of marginalization, which is systems are not built with us in mind, right? And so you hear people say things like, oh, the system is broken for people of color and people with marginalized identities. And what you hear people in these communities say, no, the system's functioning exactly as it was designed, right? And so I think that because you think about the history of the different groups, let's just stick with the United States, and you think about the origins of psychology, psychiatry, counseling, these different fields in the United States, when they all started, think about who had rights and who didn't, right? And so if you think about historically where these things started, when you think about some of the ways in which the mental health field has been used to subjugate populations of people of color, right? Such that, like, I hate to even go there, but I just think historically about how a person who was enslaved was thought to have a mental disorder if they tried to run away, right? That's a person who's like brilliant. Like, of course you want to get out of that. So, but then that trickles down to today, and you still have things like, this is one of the examples that really, really upsets me, where we have people who study genetic precursors to violence. And more often than not, when they're studying those genetic precursors to violence, I think they're kind of doing the research backwards. So they go look at people in Black and Latinx communities and say, well, let's study them and then we'll understand where the violence comes from. No, we have to understand circumstances and situations. And so if you want to study genetics authentically, right, any researcher worth their salt will say you take a representative sample. So you take a little bit of every group of people and you follow them over time, but that's not what happens. And so I think for me, these historical factors really lend themselves to why we still have such struggles engaging in conversations and engaging people of color in these discussions around mental health, because currently, I think with the exception of the last 3 or 4 years, when people look at our field, when they look at who the senior leadership is, when they look at who's in research studies, they don't see themselves, right? So the next, every time someone says to me, yes, CBT is, and I know you're being trained in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. However, right, I don't have any problems with cognitive behavioral therapy, but let's be clear, we can't dissociate cognitive behavioral therapy from people's lived experiences as racialized, gendered, or non-gender conforming, all these parts of identity. So if you're not incorporating both of those features into the work you do with CBT, you're doing people a disservice, right? All of that needs to be incorporated. So one example I can give you really quickly is I know a number of people who come to me talking about work, and I'm not going to name anyone in particular, but working with some of the mobile health platforms, right? Trying to find providers. And what I hear is things like, yeah, we got so far, but then I wanted to talk about insert aspect of identity, right? I want to talk about, being LGBTQ, or I want to talk about race, or I want to talk about gender. And my provider just wasn't prepared to have the conversation, right? So how are we training people to bring them into the field, right? Because ideally, we'll bring people in where maybe they can't treat everybody, but they can create an atmosphere that allows everybody to feel like when they're with that provider, they're in the right place. They feel comfortable. They feel welcomed, right? Until you hit a point where maybe there's some aspect of what you're struggling with that provider feels like they can't support you in. But it should never be that they can't support you related to an aspect of your identity. That shouldn't be the issue. The issue should be, well, I don't really treat anxiety disorders, so you're going to need to go over here, or I'm not a trauma expert, right? That's those are the demarcations that we should have. But unfortunately, that's really not how it works. So these are some of the things that keep people out. These are the conversations that we really don't have as much as we should. And I think these are the leverage points where we want to be able to get in and create innovations to support people.
Wow. That was, I see the hearts going crazy and I'm like, yeah, amazing. I love that you said that about how it's a difference between like not treating someone because they have an identity that you're like, I don't have experience with diversity. And that's one of like, I think probably all of our ethical codes as psychologists or counselors, therapists. But identity based, that's a lot of like discrimination. And it's almost like we use this law of like, oh, if you're not competent in an area, but also like, why aren't you competent? Like,
that part, say that again. Why aren't you competent? Yes.
You know, it's so wild out there. And I love, I don't know if this has been around for a long time, but I recently read something about that thing you said about the system being broken. Yeah. And it's like, it's not broken. It's just working for the people that it was made for. And I love that so much because it's like, you can't change the system to make it work better. You need to completely restructure the whole way that we approach, you know, incarceration or the way that we approach mental health. And it's just like, it's not even about working within this like broken system. It's about like recreating it with the people in mind who it's actually interacting with.
That's right. 100%. I couldn't have said it better, so I'm not going to say anything. Beautifully said.
That was so good. This is so cool. I think these conversations are so needed, and I'm really, really grateful that you're in this space. And I'm glad you also had that distinction too, because I think everyone is like, I need a clinical psychologist, and counseling psychology is fabulous. So, but no one understands it from the outside unless you're very nichely in it. So
that's right. You're exactly right. And, you know, I don't even, the number of times I would have to stop people every time they say, oh, she's clinical, just say psychologist. And we just, you know what I'm saying? We just leave it, just say psychologist, because then you got to have this whole conversation about, well, what's the difference? Right. And so I always say one of the main differences to me is that focus on, let's just say DEI. I feel like that's because there's so much of your training and counseling site that focuses on those issues. And I'm going to be honest, because I used to train them. There's so little of that training in clinical psych, just as a field. And I think they would even agree with that. You have like a semester, whereas in counseling psych, especially if you have a master's first, like you have to do like a year. I used to teach multicultural counseling, so I know everybody had to get it. So to me, that's one of the main differences. And people will quibble about who they treat and all, but we're not even gonna get into all that. It's just find somebody licensed. Let me just say that. Find somebody licensed to work with when you're gonna work with somebody. That's what's important.
Yes, unless you're me and an intern, but
work with the interns too, because interns have supervision, right? So there you go. So just somebody who's doing it the right way, right? Following the right rules, like the rules that we have right now. As long as they're, you know, on the good side of the law, you can work with them. And I'm not one of these people who's into, people have to have all that alphabet soup behind their names. I'm really more into, what is your training? Can I look at your training? It's not about which school did you go to. It's about, did you get good training that's going to allow you to be effective with people? And even when we talk about, I know I'm off on a tangent, but this is my soapbox, the best schools, I think sometimes what we want to be mindful of is, what is the fit? So, you know, you can get a recommendation. Oh, well, I'm going to pick on my school. I went to Howard. Oh, they went to Howard, so they're bomb. Nobody's going to say that except Howard people. But anyway, they went to Howard, so they're bomb, right? Well, you might get in there and they're not a good fit. So what I tell people is, you have a right, you have a duty to shop. If you get in there and do that consult and that person's not a good fit for you, don't hesitate to go find somebody else. So that's what I tell people.
Yes, I think that's very important, especially because there's this barrier of the intakes are more expensive, and it is kind of get out of that grip of like, well, I already shared my whole story. I don't know if I want to, but it's so important. That's like such a crucial time to be able to step into a relationship, because the more you're in it, the harder it's going to be to like switch and find someone new. But yeah, it's like, it's not about making sure the provider's happy or like not hurting their feelings. It's really about you and your needs and making sure that those are met.
Yes. Well said, Mimi.
Thank you. So, eating disorders have historically been researched. As we said, the samples are usually on cis, thin white women, and presented through that lens, especially with, again, like CBT. It's a
Yep.
great, but it also was built for white families and different, like structures that are surrounded by that Eurocentric norm. How can medical and mental health community do a better job at acknowledging that eating disorders and other mental health issues can and do affect all humans?
Oh boy, I'm so excited that you asked that specific question. I was just reading, so I published a book in 2020. Well, no, I'm sorry, 2016 has been. I have two books. The first book is not cheap because it's a textbook, and it's called The Handbook of Mental Health in African American Youth, and we have a chapter in there on eating disorders. And essentially everything you just said is in the chapter. But the other thing that I found, I was looking at some data yesterday, and I'll tell you why we need to have these conversations and include more people of color, researchers of color, people in our study samples who are of color, family members who are of color, people with eating disorders who are of color. Because one of the things that I read is that more often than not, or there's a disproportionate likelihood that I think it was Black women in particular, and I believe women of color are going to be diagnosed with ED and OS, eating disorder not otherwise specified. Why? I'll tell you what I think, because we don't know what these eating disorders look like in women of color, because we haven't taken enough time to study what they look like in women of color, right? That's the problem. So when you talk about the system being, it functions the way it was designed, right? Whether it was intentional or not, it wasn't designed to understand the eating habits, the eating behaviors, these other factors that impact body image, what you eat, how you eat for these diverse people, right? Let's just say diverse people, because men have eating disorders too. And so, why can't we build on factors like the slightly healthier body images that Black women in general are described to have, or that Latinas are described to have? Because why? There are different body shape standards. Why don't we talk about that? Why don't we have conversations about how food and your relationship to food is such an integral part of different cultures? Why can't we build on that to understand better how people are in relationship with food? Why don't we do a better job in our field of understanding, what binge disorders look like in women of color, what anorexia looks like in women of color, what bulimia looks like in women of color, and or men of color and non-gender conforming people. So the fact that we have so little data and we have so little, I guess, passion for funding people who do that kind of work, that puts us at a disadvantage. So what I'm not saying is throw everything out, period. Like, don't get any treatment. I'm not saying don't get any treatment. What I am saying, though, is let's be cognizant of how what we've built thus far fails to account for that rich diversity. How might it impact someone to be of a certain socioeconomic status? What is that relationship to eating disorders? What does acculturation have to do with eating disorders? What does experiences with racial trauma have to do with eating disorders, right? So one anecdotal thing I think about, I remember years ago when I was at Duke, and I remember one of the senior Black women who managed multicultural affairs at the institution, talked about how many women she knew in her field, Black women, who struggled with healthy eating, right? And who struggled with weight. And what she talked about from her own experience was that there's so much racism and discrimination they encounter as Black women in medicine, that for many women, comfort food and eating was how they were soothing themselves to try to manage the difficulties. So that means that there's something toxic in the environment. Why don't we understand what's toxic in the environment? And that becomes a lever. So if you can address the toxicity in the environment, maybe you can almost, without doing many other interventions, support women in developing healthier eating habits or developing a healthier relationship with food. Of course, it's not a panacea, but it certainly is a lever we could push. But I've never seen anything about that. And so I think that's part of the issue. And the final thing I'll say is, I think there are so many communities where maybe they don't have the perfect solution, but maybe they have some ideas, right? So why don't we build on what we call practice-based evidence? What are things that people are already doing in community? So the Acoma Project hosted an event on February 28th. It's still up on Facebook. And one of the things I learned from that event was this idea of what they called Sawabona. I know I'm not saying it right. Circles. And Sawabona, I don't remember what language and what country within Africa it's from, but basically it translates to I see you. And the Sawabona circles were a way that this organization called the Black Mental Health Alliance came up with to support people in community to basically enter into group therapy. That's essentially what it is. They don't call it group therapy because you're trying to get around stigma. Like, what could be better than that? Like, how many people, even if you're not Black, would want to be in a group where the premise of the group is I see you. Like, I literally see you. Like, I'm trying to understand you. Like, and I value your presence, right? That's literally what Sawabona means. It's something like I see you, but more than that, I value you. I appreciate you. What could be better than that? So I think this is why we struggle in our field, and why even to this day, when I was looking at the chapter, is what, 6 years old at this point? The chapter said the same thing you did. The literature on eating disorders in Black people, and I would add, insert all other people of color, is scarce. Why is that still the case? We can do so much better, and so many people need us to do so much better.
100%. Yeah, that's really important. And it's scary what it's doing. You know, there's so many different factors that we don't acknowledge. When you talked about Black women specifically, I thought too about this idea that there's an aspect of real safety that goes into dieting and eating disorder behaviors, because if you're already like not receiving care in the medical system because of the color of your skin, then like it's going to be so hard to trust someone to gain weight and to be in a place of like more medical discrimination, you know? And so sometimes it's more about safety than feeling like other reasons, you know, that other people have eating disorders. But if we don't acknowledge that, then no matter how far you get in your recovery, there's still going to be this aspect of like, but it's not safe. And then if all our providers are thin white providers and they don't understand safety in the medical system, then they won't understand, and they'll minimize the experiences of, you know, there's real difficulty with having more than one marginalized identity. So it makes sense you are just like striving to minimize your marginalization and maximize how much privilege you have when you're trying to take care of yourself.
That's right. That, you know, perfectly said. And the only friendly addendum I would add is just an and. This is not a but. Mm-hmm. I tell people all the time, and it was a powerful reframe for me the first time I heard it. I don't even remember where I heard it. But what I remind people is when you have any marginalized identity, the racism and discrimination and other forms of, you know, identity-based discrimination that you experience is not because of who you are, right? It's not because you and I are Black. They don't treat us poorly because we're Black. They don't treat us poorly because we're women. They treat us poorly because they're sexist and racist. Think about that. So it takes it out of the realm of there's something inherently wrong with me, that I did something to cause a person to behave toward me in this way. And it puts it in the realm of, no, that's on you. You chose to not, like to your point, not create a safe space for me to be in here. You chose to only engage in conversations and engage in medical care in a way that is, you know, is kind of tangential to my identity. I need you to go get yourself together and come back to me when you're ready to engage me the same way you would want your loved one engaged, understanding all of who I am as much as possible. So everything you said, I agree with 100%. And I just hope that people will leave our conversation understanding that the discrimination and challenges you experience are not about you. It's about those other people who create the circumstances, right, to generate those challenges and to put those roadblocks in your way. And that was super freeing for me, because I was like, yeah, they didn't put the money on the table because I'm Black. They put the money on the table because they didn't want to touch my head because they're racist. Do you know what I'm saying? So I just had to throw that in there. But everything you said was spot on.
I'm so glad you did, honestly, because I think that's such an important part of it that I wasn't even thinking about, is that the way that sometimes I go about it, I'm like, well, you have to work within the system. And it's like, you know, you're like in the system a worse person. So like, it's so hard. And it is, you know, there's all those aspects, but it is also empowering to understand that like, that's not about you as a problem. It doesn't mean there's inherently something wrong with your identity. You know, that isn't why we have systems of oppression, because there was something wrong with you. Is because people are like terrible and racist and sexist, and
You mean that's it. That's it. Like that just lift every time I hear it, it just lifts a weight off me. Because like, yeah, it's not my fault, right? Because we think we've done something, and there's something. If we change something, it's going to get better. No, that's the system. Just everything that you said, I couldn't have said it better.
that whole conversation of my life. Is so awesome. I look forward to conversing more. I know that we'll have to have more of these conversations. Where can people find you outside, social media, email, website?
Yes. So the website, we have two. One is the Acoma Project website, AAKOMA Project, all one word, Acoma Project .org. And we're on all socials, Acoma Project. The only place we're not is Snapchat, because I haven't figured out Snapchat. But that's another story for another day. I'm Gen X. Like, cut me some slack. And Dr. Alfie. So Dr. Alfie is dralfie.com. And let me tell you this little joke. I just saw him yesterday. He's like another one of my babies. A little boy named Max is one of my son's friends. So when you think of Dr. Alfie, just think of Dralfie. DRALFIEE. That he just called me that yesterday afternoon. He was like, "Hi, Dralfie." I'm like, boy. So yeah, so I'm everywhere. I was going to say dralfie.com, on Instagram, Facebook. I don't use Facebook a lot, but TikTok, Twitter, and you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm everywhere, and always posting and always trying to use my platform, if you can call it that, to do good work. On one other place you can find me is I work with Charlemagne the God on something called the Mental Wealth Alliance. He has a foundation, and you can find us there as well. But Dralfie and acomaproject.org, those are your go-tos.
Awesome. You're everywhere. That's amazing. Like, you're killing the game.
Thank you. Thank you. I try.
Oh, it was so good to talk to you. If you want to find me, you can just find me on Instagram at the.lovelybecoming, and then I'll point you in the direction of other places. But yeah, I'm so excited to be a member of the Alliance and to be able to have this important conversation. It was so good to talk with you.
Mimi, you are a gem. You are just keep doing what you're doing. Keep shining. You are wonderful. I can't wait for you to get out here, and so I can start sending all kind of people your way, and just keep doing what you're doing. Keep being beautiful. Keep having that beautiful smile. Keep fighting over there in Provo, Utah to get through school. And it really was nice to be with you today.
Yes, you as well. Enjoy, hopefully, sunny weather.
Yeah, it's really nice here today.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.